Hi, everyone. My name is Siamak, and this is my geosynthetics podcast. In this episode, I have a very special guest. Abigail Gilson is my guest in this podcast episode today. Abigail, welcome to this podcast episode. And we're talking your nighttime and my morning time. You're from the United States. If you want to say a few words.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I love visiting Australia in person, but this is the best we could do today. So I guess I'll take it. I'll enjoy your sunshine while it's dark outside for me right now.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thanks again, Abigail, for accepting my invitation for this episode. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. I'll start with my generic sort of first question of every episode about your career. So just want you to describe for myself and my audience, where did you start? How did you end up in geosynthetics?
So it was definitely not a direct path. I started as a young artist. I actually went to art school and completed art school. And my passion was actually landscape painting because I loved the environment. I loved being outdoors. And then I moved to Europe and I was a landscape painter in Europe. And for money, I actually taught English. So while I was abroad, I thought, my landscape paintings became a lot more structural. Like I really like geometry in the landscape. Like I started painting buildings and especially bridges. It got to the point where I realized that painting was not going to pay the bills. And so I said, well, I want to do something that I'm passionate about and something constructive for the world. And I actually at the time wanted to keep traveling. And so I thought, well, what profession builds bridges? Because maybe I can join the Peace Corps and build bridges in Africa or something. And I learned about civil engineering. And so I actually applied to school. They wouldn't let me go to school in Paris because I didn't have my baccalauréat scientifique or whatever. You're supposed to start that when you're very young, and I was older. So I came back to the United States and went to civil engineering school in Boston. And while I was in civil engineering school, I had an ecology class. And I remember this 2-page spread in my ecology class that had this picture of this thing called a living machine. And what it was it turned waste products like food waste and even like sewage waste into plants and fish, and it would treat the water and clean the water while producing, some beneficial product. And it was so fascinating to me that I ended up transferring to the school where this professor who made these machines taught, which is University of Vermont. And I changed my major to civil and environmental engineering rather than just civil, and was just really fascinated by the thought of like waste to energy or waste to beneficial products kind of thing. And so I graduated from UVM. And at the time I graduated, I had a couple different options of career paths. I was really interested in structural design. So I was talking to actually a residential design engineer company and a large scale construction company. And then there was a landfill design company. And what really intrigued me about the landfill design is, you have this big mountain of waste and you can produce landfill gas and you can produce compost, you can produce energy. And so I chose the landfill design company. So of course, landfill design is designing with geosynthetics. And it's a really nice balance of my passion for environment and also my love of like design and visual design kind of things. So That's how I ended up in geosynthetics.
No, that's a really fascinating journey that you had. Then the question comes, basically you started and you actually came from a more artistic background. What do you think really has maybe surprised you about engineering or working in the field of engineering?
So I guess I was surprised even from engineering school that I just really, really fell in love with the discipline of engineering and mathematics itself. I was always a very analytic painter, and when I started doing, differential equations and stuff, to me, it was like, when you're painting something, you're balancing a painting. And when you're doing math, you're balancing an equation. And so it was like the same parts of my brain almost somehow. And so that was just really surprising to me how enjoyable it was, just, the act of pencil to paper doing math. And when I started doing AutoCAD, oh my gosh, I love AutoCAD. So, you're sculpting these surfaces inside this software that become these real life, mountains, designing roads and also figuring out, the most efficient way to get from A to B on. So I guess what really surprised me is how enjoyable it was and how much it was like the same parts of my brain of, being an artist was being an engineer. And I really do think that the best engineers are, creative problem solvers. And it's, all kinds of trades can be like this. It's just kind of an artistic kind of trait that you can apply to anything. So I've definitely been able to apply that to engineering.
Yeah. Now, problem solving is something that I think most engineers really love. Then I was going to ask you about what you're known for in the geosynthetics industry right now, which is more to do with testing geosynthetics. So I just wanted to ask, how did you sort of transition from designing with geosynthetics, as you mentioned, landfill designs, more into testing with geosynthetics?
Right. So it's a good question because you think sometimes people might think a test is boring or like, it's just cookie cutter. It's just, you put something in, it spits an answer out. And that's certainly not the case. How I got involved specifically in testing is the company that I worked for, we did construction quality assurance along with design of geomembrane line containment facilities. And so as part of our CQA, we actually learned how to do electrical leak location, which is a test. It's a field test. So it's a test using electricity to locate leaks in these installed geomembrane containment facilities. And so I learned how to do this test back in, I started learning about it in 2003 when I had just started my job. And then I got quite good at it after a few years. And it was, a portion, maybe 10 to 15% of my work was doing this field test to locate the leaks in the liners. But then I started, once you start using a test, you can see all the sources of error in the test and, how to make it more effective, how to make it more transparent. And this test that I was doing was not very well known. There were very few people in the world who knew how to do it. They didn't want anybody else to know how to do it because, it would take their market share away if other people could do it. We got our foot in the door and we already had a lot of landfill clients. And so I was able to get a lot of practice. And so, what really kind of drew me to it was the design of a test. It was such a new field for the United States that, there was a lot of work to do in terms of designing these tests so that they would be more effective and that we would have better documentation. Electricity is invisible and people don't trust it. It's like voodoo, they sometimes think I'm a magician. They can't believe it. How did you do that? It's science, but you inject the electricity and it becomes visible through measurements and through using software, using mapping, much like topographic mapping. You're creating an electrical map just like you would a topographic map. And this is something that wasn't done when I first started. So I started developing the technologies and the methods to create these electrical maps. And then fast forward almost 10 years, I got noticed by the preeminent testing company in the United States and the world, TRI Environmental. And my boss, Sam Allen, really thought that this was a big part of the future of containment facility testing, is making sure it doesn't have leaks. TRI always did destructive testing of seams and strengths of materials. Well, none of that matters if you have a bunch of holes in your liner when it's installed. So I joined TRI over 10 years ago. Yeah, just over 10 years ago. And I've completely focused on this test. I mean, there's a maybe a half dozen types of this test, but it's all the same of applying electricity over a liner and finding out where it's going through and where those leaks are. So yeah, that's mainly what I'm known for.
That's right, and I think one of the courses you just did last year in Australia for the electrical leak location was a very interesting course, and I hope to see you back here doing it again for younger engineers as well. As we were chatting when you were here in Australia for the GOANZ conference and this LIS course, the Leak Location Survey course, I was really interested in your interests and what you do outside work. So we had a couple of conversations about it, and I thought maybe that becomes one of my questions in this episode, because I also want my audience to know a little bit about what you normally do outside work.
So I have a second job almost outside of work. It's, you know, the environment has always been a strong passion of mine. And I mentioned these living machines where they turn like waste to sometimes food product, like fish. I built a living machine when I was in school at University of Vermont, and we were taking brewery waste and feeding it to red wriggler worms and feeding worms to fish. And at the end, we had fish, and we had a big fish fry and sold fish sandwiches. So long story short, my hobby is farming, which is a simple way of saying that my husband and I bought an old farmstead. It's almost 40 acres. And so we're actually building a small family farm, and it has been sort of depleted and derelict for many, many years before we got it. So every inch of the property requires a little bit of TLC to get it back into being productive. Most of the property is like, you know, when you disturb the soil, the invasives come in. So a lot of it is overgrown with invasives and things like that. The fields that had been farmed in the past, the soil's all compact and kind of depleted. And so, you know, basically I'm learning about soil, I'm learning about how animals interact with the soil, I'm learning about chemistry, I'm learning about, you know, what you can do to sort of bring the soil back to health. And ultimately, so there's this new term, regenerative farming. It's where you regenerate the land, so you're producing food and at the same time making the land, you know, healthier than it was before. And a lot of that has to do with animals. So we have a small herd of cattle, and a lot of my spare time is dealing with actually manure, which is it's the most amazing resource. I mean, we started raising cattle almost 6 years ago. And every year the land becomes more lush and beautiful and productive. And of course I haul for every, believe it or not, every cow produces about 25,000 pounds of manure every year.
Yeah.
And I shovel all of that by hand, and I deliver it to my trees, and I deliver it to my garden. So we have a small family garden, and we also have the main crop of the farm is actually hazelnuts.
Yeah.
And so we have, right now we have about 4 acres of trees. So I scoop the manure around the trees every year, you know, weigh it, find out how much they're going to eat. Okay, you get 50 pounds this year because you're this tall. And we have some chickens, so, you know, eggs. And so it keeps me very busy. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, every season has a different task.
Yeah.
And right now it's winter, so it's invasive removal, because all the areas that get really crowded and bushy, I go in with my chainsaw when I get in there, because there's no wasps. I'm very allergic to wasps, and there's no poison ivy. Poison ivy is awful. You don't have it there, but so get it in the winter, you know, harvest some firewood of the bad trees. It's very satisfying when you have a bad tree, bad being like the berries are toxic to the cattle. And it spreads, you know, the birds spread the berries, and it crowds out other trees, and it kills the nice native trees. And I chop them up with my chainsaw and have a nice big pile, and burn it in our wood stuff. Yeah. And then the landscape opens up, and then you see these every year. I see, young trees coming through. There's an old seed bank, on the old land, and there's trees coming through I've never seen before, but they're native trees. They've always been there. They just needed room to grow. You gotta pull out the bad guys, and they'll come up. But it's great. I found a tree just this last week that I had no idea was growing on a property. It's a bitternut hickory tree. And these trees are so abundant. A mature tree, you can harvest like 10 gallons of oil from this tree. Oh, wow. And it has a really soft shell, so you can send it right through an oil press. And it's oil growing on trees. You don't have to grow acres and acres of canola oil and spray a bunch of pesticides on it. And, so it's just right there. Actually, it's hilarious. It's growing right outside my front door. It's right there. It's like 8 inches in diameter. I never knew it was bitternut hickory. And the whole time I'm like, I should order some bitternut hickories. So yeah, it's always an adventure.
Oh, that's perfect. No, that's really really fantastic, and I was amazed to hear it when we were talking about it last year when you were here in Australia. And now that I'm hearing more about it and see your passion about environment in general and farming, I hope one day I'll come to and maybe do a video podcast from your farm.
That would be great. You'd be most welcome. Bring your boots, because it's going to be
muddy.
A lot of walking, but lots to see.
Perfect. And the other question that I ask all of my guests, and it's basically the closing question for this podcast episode, Abigail, about a highlight of your career. So especially people like yourself who started from a complete different environment in arts and painting, then to design, and then to testing, and you have outside work interests in farming and caring about environment. So when you look at all of that, what do you think is the highlight of your career, and why?
So I think the highlight is probably when I got the opportunity to co-author a paper with JP Giroux. And not just because it was such an honor, because he's for obvious reasons, but the way his mind works and how, he's such a, and when I say perfectionist, I don't mean it in a bad sense. He's a perfectionist in the way like Vermeer is a perfectionist. Like when you look at a Vermeer painting versus a Monet, they're both amazing. But I'm more of a Monet painter. I'm a little bit messy. I get it out. I like to see, the feeling of the sketch of the light. But Vermeer, he only had about maybe 40 paintings in his lifetime. He obsessed over every single one, and they're just amazing. And it's something that, as a young painter, the best advice I ever got as a young painter was to make a copy of the old masters. And so I would force myself to do these Vermeer copies, because it was so not me. And I learned more from doing that than anything else. And so being able to work with him and seeing how sharp he is and how he defines every detail of his paragraphs and of the papers, it was just an awesome experience, and helped me further to, everyone needs more patience, but I definitely need more patience and in writing and in everything we do. So yeah, I would have to say it was that.
Perfect. No, that's great. No, I got to work with JP Giroux as part of one of the master classes that we had as last year in the GOANZ conference, and I had the same experience. He is definitely a perfectionist in the best way. The amount of attention he has for every little detail. I asked a question, and in my opinion, it was like, something that I wanted to ask, and I was expecting maybe a less than 1 minute answer from him, but he actually emailed someone that I knew and was asking, like, who was that guy who asked that question, because I wanted to add more to that answer. And then 4 emails because I received the email. It was a chain, so he went through 3, 4 people to get to me, and I was like, yeah, it was me. And initially I was like scared. Oh, maybe I did something I shouldn't have asked that question. But yeah, then we sort of interacted via email to get the rest of the answers. So I think you're right. And JP Giroud is probably one of the pioneers of our industry anyway. So we all have the most respect for him. And if he listens to this podcast or sees us, hi, JP. So thank you, Abigail. That's what we have time for today. It was a very interesting, very enjoyable conversation. Thanks again for your time. And I hope you have a very happy 2023 ahead of you. It's still January 2023. So hopefully we see each other somewhere in the world in the future, near future. And yeah, thanks again.
I'm sure we will. All right. Thank you, Siamak.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks very much. And thanks to the audience. We'll catch up with you in our next episode. See ya.